acceptable, again, that puts a huge amount of pressure on the council to have another thing.
And the other thing to remember is that, of course, this is a rolling programme. This is only phase 1 and phase 2. Our council officers are out and about now, well, probably not in the dark, but looking for more sites. They've probably taken what they would call the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones. So they'll still be looking on garage sites, they'll still be looking on car parks. We've got Sunstead Road car park coming up, going to threaten the viability of the shops there. They're going to be looking at what they call infill, what we would call our nice green spaces around our estates. They're looking at building a lot of houses, a lot of units. This is just the beginning, and it's really important to remember that. And if we do have another Labour council, it's just going to roll on and on and on.
Can I inject a bit of reality into you? Because no matter who steps into the council offices after the election, whatever colour, that council is going to suffer under the same pressure to build. The only choice that you're giving is to change the vehicle, i.e. change it from brick by brick to something else possibly. Now
the housing targets would stay the same. But I would say to you, there are plenty of brownfield sites in the town centre that have good infrastructure that are dying to be redeveloped, and that's where we should focus.
The London plan by the Mayor has been decided. The council is working towards that. There's now the national planning framework that's now for consultation. Sergeant Jabby, the housing secretary, has said that he's all for building up. Now he's a conservative, and the pressure is coming from there down to London Mayor, down to all the councils. So what can you offer to maybe reject some of this, or to listen to the people that live in the borough to accommodate their concerns, because the pressure is coming down from the top, and I feel that if you step in, you're going to buckle under the same pressure.
I mean, certainly one of the things in our response to the recent consultation on the London plan was to say that actually could Croydon's numbers be reviewed, because we've delivered a huge number of properties in the last few years, and it's about time some of our neighbouring boroughs took up their fair share. So we are pushing back on that, but I still say to you, I think there are plenty of sites in the town centre where we could build homes.
Would you go for converting office blocks? Because there's a lot of empty ones.
There's an awful lot of empty office blocks.
We've got lots of people wanting to ask questions, so if we could just, lady here's been waiting patiently.
You mentioned legal challenge, and I just wanted to ask if we have had legal advice and whether any of the things they're doing is actually illegal. Like, are they flouting the planning law? Are they allowed to do all of these things? Have we even got advice?
I think what a lot of what they're doing, it's not illegal. What they're doing, they're going through a process, a planning process. It's going to planning committee. Whether it is morally right, what is being done, I think perhaps is another issue. Whether it's in the public good or the public interest, I think is another issue. I think, and it's about process. If you challenge things legally, you're challenging the process rather than the actual decision, what was approved. So it's difficult. There are conflicts of interest running through many of these things. We've challenged conflicts of interest, and many of the people here have challenged conflicts of interest between leading councillors. We've challenged that conflict, and we've been turned away by the borough solicitor, who says it's all okay. So we don't think that, and lots of members of the public don't think that it's okay. And I think we pledged that if we were in control, related councillors would not hold adjoining portfolios, which is what's happening currently. So the risks are there, but I don't think there's much illegal. There's not illegal things happening. But whether they're regarded as correct is something else. Before I come back to you, so there are other people. So then.
You touched on brownfield learning a little while ago. Now, I know I'm a member of CPRE, Campaign for Protection of Rural England, and they've done studies around the country to say that there is enough brownfield land to fulfil all the government's building for the next 10 years. How much priority is the council giving to building on brownfield land compared to green spaces and green belt? Because they shouldn't be taking green belt land. Because once it's gone forever. And then we'll just get an urban sprawl where one community merges into another and it's just be one great big sprawl.
Yeah, which is what we don't want.
Yeah.
I think the problem we've had in the last 4 years, regeneration in the town centre, which is those brownfield sites, has pretty much come to a stop. So there were lots of schemes progressing. Taberner House is a fine example. There was a planning application approved to build on Taberner House. That's not been, when the Labour Council came in, they stopped it. So that's not been developed, it's still lying empty. The old Nestle building has planning permission, it's empty. The Royal Mail building next to East Croydon Station, empty. There's lots of sites around, particularly in the town centre, where they're empty or they've got planning permissions. Westfield hasn't happened. Westfield was going to bring lots of money into the town, but also provide housing in the town as well.
There's
So
nearly
again,
20,000 properties have planning permission and aren't being built,
Yeah.
because I did that research for
Yeah.
our objections.
so there's lots of stuff could be being done in the town centre. And as Lynn says, Croydon historically has always delivered its housing numbers. They're stretching, but Croydon has always delivered, be it Labour or Conservative councils, the housing numbers have been delivered. Where you deliver them, there's a different emphasis from what a Conservative council and a Labour council would do. Because the Labour councils and the evolution of the suburbs paper that Tim mentioned, they're just looking to the south of the borough and what can we do at the south of the borough rather than looking at the centre and actually revitalising the centre. Because if we regenerate the centre, it brings people, it brings jobs, prosperity, income, etc. So that's what we really want to drive is the
We
centre.
should be using brownfield
Yes.
as opposed to green spaces.
We agree.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to this chap here and then I'm going to go to that chap there.
Can I just come in with just a comment on the targets? As part of the Mayor of London's planning consultation recently, the targets were published by borough for the next 10 years. And it was really noticeable that Croydon's target is twice as big as Bromley's, for example, which is next door. Physically, in terms of land space, it's about the same size, and yet they have half the target. So the methodology, how they decided where to put where to request that councils provide these properties, does look extremely suspect. So I think we need to be really pressing back very hard against the mayor to actually demonstrate where these numbers came from, because they simply don't look sustainable. And if our target is 30,000, then why isn't Bromley's? It is very strange.
How do we do that?
Well,
How do we press back and keep asking who does that? How do we do it? We can't all go away thinking somebody else is going to do it.
We've done it through the consultation process for the London Plan,
Right.
and lots of the residents' associations
Okay.
have done it through the London Plan as well. So that consultation finished a couple of weeks ago. So we as opposition councillors, we put in opposition. I know GLA, Greater London Assembly members put in opposition to it. So we've been challenging the numbers back on that consultation. So we have done that. Right, sir.
That's actually, you just said my first half what I was going to say. I mean, Croydon, I think, is 1,560 dwellings per year, whereas everywhere else is 700 or 800 per year. The other thing that occurs to me is it seems to be a number of dwellings are not looking to house a number of people, which means that they're going to put these stacks of little blocks of flats with 1 or 2 flats in, 1 or 2 beds in, and not 3 or 4 bed dwellings for families with 3 or 4 teenagers.
Yeah. That's correct, and that's another thing that we've pushed back on the London Plan is the lack of family housing, and the consultation has done away with family housing targets. So the reality is, to hit the numbers, we're going to get lots of 1-bedroom flats, and we're seeing that through the planning process in Croydon already, where we're seeing family homes that house 4, 5, 6 people being knocked down, a block of flats of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom flats being built. But it's not actually what people want. People want family housing, and we're not getting that coming through the system. And coming back to Brick by Brick, that's meant to be supplying, affordable housing. Lots of that is 1-bedroom as well. And I've at committee have challenged the fact, why are we building all these 1-bedroom houses when the desire and the need is for family accommodation? So that is a big problem, and that's something we have pushed back on. Whether we're successful, we wait to see.
So I think if you got into control on May the 3rd, then there are 2 things really that have come out of tonight that you ought to do. One, I think, is to go a bit further on brick to brick. I think your policy should be to actually, in an orderly fashion, wind it up, because there is no place for councils in property development, and they should not be in it. But on the question of the planning, then the only way to address the brownfield ideas is to actually roll back and review the local plan, if you're allowed to prematurely, and actually change the local plan so that future planning permissions will be in a framework which is more acceptable to all of us.
If I deal with the local plan has only just been approved. The reality is a new council could open the process again, but that process takes 6 to 7 years to actually. I started the local plan that's just been approved. It looked very different when I started it, but I started it back in 2011. 2011 I started that and issued the first documents for it. It's changed a great deal through the process. So yes, we could look at that, but it's going to take a very long time and not answer the immediate need. The other thing we're looking at is that there are things called supplementary planning documents, and the evolution of the suburbs is a supplementary planning document. So at the moment, the council have a particular route they're taking with this document. And again, if we were in control of the council, we would stop that document in its tracks and start again. And we can try to use supplementary planning documents to try and nuance what is in the local plan. Because when Labour came in, they did that. They nuanced what we had already put in place as a local plan to meet what they wanted to do. So it would be an issue of nuancing that local plan. Would probably be the quickest way to try and change some of these policies.
On the subject of what the council's role in providing housing is, I think the council's role in providing housing is to provide council housing and to facilitate affordable housing. Yeah. It isn't actually to be a market player producing properties for sale. I would like to see the council get back into building council houses. People find this quite hard to believe, but other than a few houses that they have completed that Conservative Cabinet member Councillor Dudley Mead started prior to 2014, other than completing a few houses there, they have not built a single council house. Actually, we as an administration over 8 years built a lot of council houses, and we managed to do it without actually upsetting people. Hardly any of them were contentious, and people are living in them. So I would like to see us get back into that. That does require the council to be making a strong claim with the Secretary of State for why it should be allowed to do that, because it's not quite as simple as it used to be. But actually the Secretary of State has indicated that he is very up for councils that want to build council housing to be enabled to do it, and that's what I want to do. I want to be providing genuinely affordable homes for people who need that level of discount. That's what I think the council's role should be.
Sir?
Right, two linked questions really. Now, I don't know very much about business, but if the council has loaned this company £10 million and you decide to close it down, as the creditor or the debtor, whatever the correct word is to use, if no legal contracts have been set up, you could close the business and take back the land and have the money. Because also the money it's a paper figure, isn't it? Because you just said I'm lending the money and you've got the land. No £10 million actually passed hands. So if you decided to close it, you take the land back, you lost some money, a loss of interest, and you paid ridiculous salaries to the staff that are working it. But would it mean that we lose 10 million?
Yes, because it's moved from the council's balance sheet to the company's balance sheet.
So you close it down, what happens to it? It comes back.
When they bought the land.
And actually the council didn't have that money in the first place, so the council borrowed the money that it loaned to Brick by Brick.
But then did Brick by Brick give it back to the council to buy the land?
Yes.
Some of it, yes.
Any contracts have been drawn up, I can see it changes if you get in. Any contracts
so you've got to be very careful what you do.
Without your
full you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the key thing to say is that Brick by Brick itself is just a vehicle. It of itself is not evil. It's what it's being used for that's bad. So if you repurposed it, you could perfectly well keep it going, but do the right thing with it as opposed to doing the wrong thing with it. It may be simpler, it may be symbolically important to close it, but I mean, I'm more relaxed about that. I think what matters is how you use it and what it's doing. And what I want to make sure in the first instance is that we stop it doing the things that are causing the most hardship and offence in their local communities.
Building on your point about council housing, why don't we actually mobilise all the associations and the people on the estates and people in Croydon to support that motion, which is that actually the Croydon Council should actually not be profiteering and going into private development, but actually should be providing social housing and council housing. Surely that would unite everybody.
In theory, you're right. One complication that we haven't mentioned so far tonight is that actually the council is also setting up a charity which will actually manage quite a lot of the housing that Brick by Brick builds. And it's doing that because that's the way it gets round the right to buy issue. Because what this council in its current form does not want is to build houses that the people who live in them later acquire the right to buy. And it is absolutely determined to prevent that. And that's one of the key drivers for all of this very tortuous, convoluted way that it's doing it. And it's also noticeable that all of the other authorities that are doing the same thing are also Labour authorities, because ideologically they have a problem with right to buy, and they have a problem with people ending up owning the houses that have been built. So that's the sort of driver behind a lot of this.
Yes, they won't build any social housing.
Well, that's why they don't want to build council housing, because with it comes the right to buy it.
Right, lady at the back there.
How we're going to stop these actions by brick. You suggest that we need to have a Croydon council. I suspect the majority of people in this room will be voting Conservative at the council elections in a few weeks' time. But can I ask what the Conservative councillors are doing, say, in the north of the borough, or which are predominantly Labour-based, to regain some space there? Because I think at the moment it looks as if you're still going to be in a minority at the end of the because everything seems to be going Labour at the moment. So I just think we need a strategy to preserve the south of the borough, but also we need to convert some of the north of the borough
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been trying to sort of not make this a party political broadcast. That's not what we're here to do. But you know, we are very busy. We're campaigning in various wards in the north. We've been very busy in Norbury Park. We're very busy in the centre of the borough. The practical truth is that Croydon has a largely Conservative voting south and a largely Labour voting north, and a band in the middle that decides what flavour the council is. And that's been the case. It's been that way now for 30 years. And that isn't going to change anytime soon. So both parties, being blunt about it, are putting all of their effort into that band across the middle, because they both know that how places like Addiscombe and Wadden vote is going to determine who controls the council. And we know that in most cases in that area you win by 100 or 150 votes. So it actually doesn't take very many people being angry with the council to enable you to shift the national position. I would be lying to you if I said that London hadn't moved slowly towards Labour over the last 10 years as a whole. But nonetheless, in Croydon there are particular issues, two big driving issues that are really causing people to think, you know, I would normally vote Labour, but I'm not going to this time. One is brick by brick and the whole planning and development issue. And the other is the fact the council doesn't listen. And those two things put together are actually having a significant impact in those marginals. So what I would say is, don't give up hope. You know.
Have you got any proposals in the marginal areas?
Of who?
The council at the moment. Are they building brick by brick stuff in the Labour areas, or are they sticking it all in the Tory bits?
Well, it's a funny thing that the vast majority is in the Conservative areas. I'm sure that's a complete coincidence. There are actually some in the north of the borough and in places that are causing great upset there, though. So it's not entirely in Conservative areas, but that is mainly where they are pushing them, yes.
You've waited a long time.
Yes, there's two things. First of all, what discretion does the council have with government and London rules and so on? I mean, we've talked about the London plan, but if a planning application comes along, can you approve it if it doesn't agree with the London plan? Does the mayor have any enforcement powers on what you do? I know we can call in big plans, but as far as I know, little ones they can do it. You can more or less do what you like. And in terms, and are there any planning guidelines in terms of green space? How much green space should be there? Should it be taken, and so on? And separately from that, Jason will know very well. We talked about what the Conservatives are going to do. We had the Coulsdon Master Plan. That was very unpopular, hundreds of objections, but the council pushed it through regardless. Then we had an all-planning application for Aldi. I went to a lot of trouble to object to that in Coulsdon on the grounds there was not enough parking, and it'd be overloaded with traffic, and that was pushed through, and people weren't listened to. And that's, I'm sorry to say, that's the previous administration. And the legal challenge that was mounted led to Labour doing something much worse. So it's how you're going to make sure you actually do take account of what people say, because that didn't happen 5 or 6 years ago. It did have serious consequences. 2 questions, please.
I lost the first one. What was the
Oh,
first
sorry,
one?
the first one was, what power does the council have to ignore government guidelines? What enforcement mechanisms are there? If SADC can't, if you give planning permission to a little development with lots of parking, which we want, and SADC can't doesn't like it, what can you do about it? Because in planning, we have it time and time again, objections, not enough parking, not enough parking. In the north of the borough, they're exactly the same. They're very angry. Think about that Phillips building and all the problems. Time and time again, the council officers have a policy to cut back on parking, and yet you ask the public, we want more parking.
Yeah, the council has operated on working on parking minimums. In the current London plan, there's a minimum and maximum parking, and this council has always worked on the minimums, which we've objected to. In the proposals for the London plan, the parking actually gets thrown out the window completely, and there is no parking. And if you're within a radius of a transport interchange, there's no parking allowed whatsoever. So, I mean, the point is we have to be compliant with the London plan. So any local authority within London has to comply with the London plan. And the London plan is the only regional plan in the country. There used to be regional plans all over the country and they were done away with. The only one that remains is London. So we have to comply with the London plan, and the London plan in turn has to comply with the national framework. And the national framework is out to consultation at the moment. So you have to comply. When schemes are of a certain size, they go to the mayor and the GLA for comment, and they have to have the mayor's approval. And the scheme coming forward for Lime Green Road, the mayor has actually said that he doesn't approve of that scheme. That's a brick-by-brick scheme on Lime Green Road.
What happens if they don't comply? Because Tollers, the parking levels didn't comply, and it's still got planning permission.
I think the reality of pushing it, which is what Peter's suggesting, is that if you've got small schemes, kind of do what you want to do and see if you get away with it, really. The answer is that I don't know, because the council doesn't operate in that manner.
Is there any enforcement mechanism on an individual scheme? The plan has to comply with the London plan.
There's no enforcement mechanism from the London mayor to come down and enforce what's happening in boroughs, because frankly a lot of boroughs don't enforce what goes on in their own boroughs anyway.
What's the point of having the plan then?
It's very hypothetical questions that I don't think I can't really give you an answer to.
The important thing is, if you as an administration, I mean, Boris Johnson was going to allow more parking out of London, if you as an administration say we will favour parking where it's appropriate, and you do that, can anyone stop you?
If I were in administration, I would be pushing for parking maximums, not parking minimums, which is what we have at the moment. So that's what I would be pushing for, is parking maximums. Whether we can push that further, we would need to look into at the time. I can't give you an answer on that right now.
But obviously the reverse, in the sense that if you refuse permission for something that the plan says you should allow, then it goes to appeal and you lose.
And sorry, another question. What about how we're going to do things better going forward compared with 7 or 8 years ago?
I think we're in very different times. You relate particularly to Coulsdon. I mean, there will be applications that are unpopular. There always will be, and there will be applications that are approved despite the fact that there's local opposition to them. I think with brick by brick, we're in a very different scenario where we've got huge applications across the whole borough having real impact directly on people's community, on their council estates and their whatever. So I think we're in a very different ball game to 7 or 8 years ago, and the pressure on numbers is different now. But the Coulsdon Master Plan was worked through with residents' associations in Coulsdon, and the master plan was about bringing around Cane Hill, etc.
Is
So there's a lot of
Labour-
detailed work went into that.
Is Labour's referendum plan workable? Well, I don't think it is.
I don't know. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, that's what you've written this letter saying, come on, let's see you put this into action. And there's been no response today. So, and we've asked the council, are you going to do this and listen? And it was kind of laughed off and, moved on to something else. So we have asked Alison Butler, are you going to listen to these referendum idea? And there's no straight answer.
But the referendum idea is sort of aimed at enabling residents to object to what you might call gentrification of estates. So it's almost serving the opposite purpose from the one that actually in Croydon we might want it to serve.
Is it practical?
Probably not.
Right, I've got a new face here, and then we'll go round 1, 2, 3.
Not very new
face.
I think if the London plan gets accepted, which we as a Residents Association objected to, and a lot of others have, I think we've got a perfect storm, because already the Residents Association, so the guy from Sanderstead, I'm from Riddlesdown, we've been trudging up to the council for the last year, 18 months, objecting to medium-sized detached houses being flattened, and 8, 9, not 10, as you know, because that takes it into a different league. 7, 8, 9 flats are going up. Majority of them are one bedroom. We've got a situation now where the developers, well, they're not even developers, because they are planning people, most of these, and they're just putting the planning permission in. And I think already we've got some of the ones that have gone through are up for sale, extraordinary, with the old house still there, and they're obviously waiting for developers to make these big buys. And what's starting to worry me is that we pull out all the stops to go to the council. There's loads of people against it, with good arguments on the planning. On the planning, we talked about parking. I mean, we're going back to council in a couple of weeks' time, because they do parking assessments around. They call it a beat assessment, I think. And we looked at one recently come in where there's virtually no parking. There's going to be 8 cars parked in the back garden, which is right up against the next door's wall, which is just a bungalow. But they say there's enough space round. So they've done 2 surveys. They did them at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Well, on a Saturday you can't get near it, and there's main roads and buses and everything else. So, but the council are just accepting this, and I think the problem is, and I asked at a planning meeting that was organised a few weeks ago, I think the planners have been cut back. They're not looking at the applications. So what then happens after it's been given, this has already happened to us several times, that once it's accepted and done, and I must admit the planning authority in Croydon said to us about 6 months ago, we'll protect your green belt, but detached houses are up for grabs to knock down and build more. And there'll be lots more one bedroom, because someone said dwellings, and that's what they're going for at the moment, because if they're doing it in the south of the borough, they're overlooking a bit of woodland. Some of these will go eventually for 400,000. They're not affordable. There's no affordable houses in at all, and you can get in a short space, certainly where we are now, that within a couple of hundred or 200 yards of each other, 3 are going to be knocked down, not together, and there'll be about 30 flats being built in there. It makes huge differences to the infrastructure, but once you go under 10, there's no cause to actually evaluate the infrastructure, whether there's primary schools, whether there's lighting, whether there's flood risks, all that. It all goes by the board. But they come back and sneakily say, oh, well, now we've done this, we made a mistake, and these are professional planners. They don't intend to build. And they come back and say, we want another flat, And I was talking to Tim the other week, and we were discussing whether it's worth even going back. Some of the residents' associations say it's not even worth us actually standing there, because you jabber for your 3 minutes and it goes past. So what worries me here, that over the last 3 or 4 years we've lost the ability. You can't win them all, because clearly something's got to happen, some development's got to happen. But you feel you might as well just sit and talk to the wall that way, rather than, because nobody's listening. Nobody's listening, and I think sooner or later we need to take, or perhaps we should look at the amount of planning applications and appeals that have gone in and see how many have won. And I doubt whether anyone's won any
from the Residents Association and private people that have objected next door. I just don't think it happens anymore.
No, it doesn't.
And everyone's just giving up, and that's going to make Croydon into thousands of one-bedroom flats. And they'll be expensive. They continue to do it because they're paying so much over the top. You can't blame the people. They're actually selling, because these people are being offered 50, 60, 70,000 pounds more than they would get elsewhere. And one guy said to me, right, he said, I'm 70 now, I've got to downsize, so I might as well do this, because if I don't do it, the next person's going to do it.
Why is it in the interest of the council just to put that stamp on there?
Sorry?
Why is it in the interest of the council to just?
Well, they obviously, they are what they're doing. I'm not saying they're wrong in this, but what they want is dwellings to meet even the existing plan, let alone the new one that's coming up with 30,000 houses.
I mean, the fundamental problem with what the council is doing is that because it's taking out loads of detached houses and putting more flats there, at the moment, with the flats that are going to go up in the town centre, there isn't a progression out for those people as they couple up, have children, to then move out to more spacious accommodation for their increasing size of family. That's disappearing. So we're going to have a real perfect storm that it's going to be even worse than it is now. One of the things that I think we're going to get chucked out of here in a minute, so I'm going to sort of try and summarise. But one of the things that as an incoming administration we will do if elected is make a lot of changes to how the planning committee works. So at the moment, the chair of the planning committee has super referral powers, which means if officers are going to recommend for refusal a scheme that the chair of planning thinks should go ahead, he can call it in and the committee can then approve it, because if the chair of planning says do it, the committee usually do it. So we're going to abolish that. We're going to have a position on the planning committee for the residents' associations to have a sort of rotating person from around the borough who advises the planning committee on the existing residents' perspective on the business they're going to transact that night. Unfortunately, if we could, we would put them on as voting members, but the law says you can't do that. So we can only put them on as advisors. But at least that means that, as well as officers having sort of full rights to say and comment as much as they want, residents' associations will as well. We're going to offer the vice chair of planning committee to the minority group, so that both sides have a sort of stake in managing the meeting. At the moment, it's all managed one way. And I think you might say, well, surely if you're in control, you want to be managing it only one way. But actually, I think democracy suffers if one party is completely dominant and can just ride roughshod over the other. So we're going to do that. What other planning committee changes are there? Pre-applications, yes. At the moment, the odds are stacked massively against residents and residents' associations, because the developer can come along, pay the council to advise them how to get their scheme through committee. I don't think that's morally right. I think planning should be a process whereby the committee looks at the scheme on merit, the developer puts forward the scheme they want to build, the committee adjudicates on it and makes a decision. At the moment, this business of paying for pre-application advice, that's why virtually every scheme comes to committee recommended for approval, because the officers can hardly say, we don't recommend this for approval, when they've been paid loads of money to actually help the developer develop it. So that will go, and we will only have pre-application for the really big schemes. So we're going to make a lot of changes to how planning committee operates to try and restore some honesty to it, because the practical truth is, if you go back 10 or 15 years, planning wasn't decided mostly on party political lines. Individual members looked at individual schemes and they came to their own mind as to what they thought of that scheme. And I used to laugh every Friday morning because the leader of the council would come in spitting blood saying, you're never going to believe what the planning committee did last night. And actually I think that's healthy. I think if the leader gets annoyed on a Friday morning because the planning committee has actually used its independence of mind to do the right thing, I think that's a good thing, and it makes for a stronger democracy. So there will be a number of very tangible things that we will do to try and restore some faith in the planning process, because every time we have meetings with residents' associations and people who've been to planning committee, it's really clear that people have just completely lost faith in the process, and that's a problem.
We said there were 1, 2 and 3 questions.
Yeah.
That was 4 questions. I've got one. They need to be fairly brief because our time is.
Yeah, you've actually again said half of what I was going to say. With the super referral business, if the planning department turns something down, particularly on safety reasons, but they super refer to push it through. Is there any way that you could declare that you'll revoke it if the planning people have said that it's dangerous? Well, I mean, what I gather with all this, these different plans now, that anything normal, that normally would have stopped something going through, they just reject it and laugh at you. But I think if it's something to do with safety, like you know, underground car parks full of petrol fumes, or to do with highway blocking, something, you know, that is the sort of thing that I think is the only thing that you've got a chance of getting something stopped on.
We can't revoke anything. If something's been given planning permission, then it has planning permission. So we can't retrospectively go back and take that away. It would be going forward, then your things would be treated differently. So we can't undo what's already been done.
The people who agreed it, and then that's negligent, because definition of negligence
that's a process, and you need to go through a judicial review to do the process.
But then
you
who's
can't actually
responsible
undo
for the negligence?
Yeah, but you can't undo a planning application, so you need to go through a legal process.
That would be a legal process, yeah, but it's negligence, gross negligence, and who ends up paying the
But
bill?
you would need to prove that, which would be difficult. So, lady at the back.
You mentioned earlier that the south of the boroughs remain conservative, and also you mentioned the fact that Labour are putting a lot of developments and agreeing a lot of them in the south of the borough. Why do the Conservatives not have any control of that, considering those people have made that decision to say, I want Conservatives in, but are then not in control of what Labour are doing?
It's democracy in its numbers. There are 70.
It's social engineering.
Okay. The problem is that Croydon is a borough. There are 70 councillors. There are 30 Conservative councillors. There are 40 Labour councillors. So therefore, the Labour council are in majority, and they control the cabinet and any committees that exist, and they control the votes. And those votes go across the borough. So whether you live in north, south, east, or west, the Labour council is the one that's in charge. So we, as an opposition, oppose, challenge, shout very loudly, and you know, annoy them. But at the end of the day, they're the ones with the votes, which is why, come election time, you know, we need to change that around so that we've got a different composition of council, and then things can be done differently. But it is democracy. You know, it's how the elections work.
What ends up happening is if they put more Labour developments in the south of the borough, they would become more Labour, and the whole borough would become.
I don't like to be political at these meetings because not everyone here is necessarily a Conservative, but you know, I think you're drawing the conclusions that perhaps we would suggest. So it was the chap here.
I've heard a lot of good ideas tonight, almost like a slogan: press, petitions, protest. Yeah. Now, I think you might have a good resource here.
Yeah.
How are you going to mobilise this resource over the next few weeks? Because I think maybe you need to send us an email as to what you think we could do to help you try to bring about more press footage. You know, get us signing petitions or get us protesting.
I think what we need is some leading lights here to kind of come together, and we can work together. I think Mario's our publicity man, and we need to work together to come up with some of these. You're quite right. Press, petition, protest. Yeah. So, but we need to work with some of you. But we obviously can't work with everybody collective. But we need to have some leading people that we can.
Could you at least send a plan to us? You know, an email plan.
Yes. Yeah. But I think we need to draw that plan up with you.
So would it start us joining local residents associations such that they act as a focal point? Because I don't belong to it.
Well, we work very closely with residents associations. You've got a number of resident association chairmen here. So, so we could certainly put a list out of residents associations. We don't necessarily know all of them, but we know a good many of them. So that's one way. The residents associations do work very hard to reject some of these schemes.